On August 18, 1590, his granddaughter's third birthday, John White finally stepped back onto the shores of Roanoke Island. He expected to find a thriving colony of 115 souls. Instead, he found a ghost town. The houses had been taken down. The area was fortified with a palisade, and carved into a wooden post was a single word: Croatoan. There was no cross, the pre-arranged signal for distress, and no signs of a struggle. For centuries, this has been framed as a supernatural vanishing. But here at Hidden Layer, we look past the ghost stories. Let's stay with what's certain. The settlers didn't disappear into thin air. They left a message. But what did that message actually mean? What's usually overlooked here is that the mystery of Roanoke wasn't born from the wilderness, but from the high seas of Europe. John White had left for supplies in 1587, intending to return within months. However, the timing could not have been worse. King Philip II of Spain was launching his Great Armada against England. Queen Elizabeth I issued a stay on all shipping. Every capable English vessel was drafted to defend the Channel. For 3 long years, the 115 settlers were effectively erased from the English priority list. When White finally secured passage on a privateering vessel, he was no longer a governor on a rescue mission. He was a passenger on a ship hunting Spanish gold. This delay is the most critical fact in the entire story. On one hand, we can view the settlers as victims of unfortunate timing. On the other, we must consider if the English crown simply viewed them as a secondary concern compared to the survival of the kingdom. The question remains: how long could a small group of Europeans survive in an unfamiliar land without a single shipment of supplies? And more importantly, who did they turn to when the food ran out? To the casual observer, the word Croatoan feels like a cryptic riddle, but to John White, it was a geographical coordinate. Let's stay with what's certain. Before White left in 1587, the colonists had discussed moving 50 miles into the Main. They agreed that if they left, they would carve their destination into a tree or post. Crucially, they were told to carve a Maltese cross above the name if they were leaving in secret or under duress. White found the word, but he did not find the cross. To him, this was a relief. It suggested an orderly planned relocation to Croatoan Island, modern-day Hatteras, where their ally Manteo and his people lived. However, there is a secondary layer to this evidence that often gets ignored. While the carving suggests a peaceful move, White was never actually able to check the island. A massive storm and a failing anchor forced his ship to abandon the search and return to England. This leaves us with a frustrating gap in the record. Was the carving a genuine signpost to safety? Or was it a desperate attempt to point towards the only friends they had left in a hostile world? The evidence is there, but the verification never happened. If we follow the signpost, we find the theory of integration. For generations, the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina and the descendants of the Hatteras people have maintained oral traditions of white ancestors who could read from talking books. Early explorers in the 1700s reported seeing indigenous people with gray eyes and European features. This points toward a logical conclusion. The settlers, abandoned by their country, simply became part of the local population. It's a narrative of survival through adaptation. But let's weigh this against the harder historical data. Modern DNA studies have been inconclusive. While some families show markers that could be linked to early colonial Europe, the genetic record is messy after 4 centuries of migration. And this is where it gets interesting. If integration was the answer, why didn't subsequent English explorers find them? Some suggest the settlers intentionally hid their identity to avoid being reclaimed by a crown that had already left them to die. Others argue that the settlers didn't merge as a single group, but scattered, effectively diluting their presence until they became a legend rather than a colony. Is it possible the lost colony was never lost at all, but simply stopped being English? There is, however, a much grimmer explanation recorded in the annals of the Jamestown colony. Years after Roanoke was abandoned, Captain John Smith reported a chilling conversation with Chief Powhatan. The chief allegedly claimed that his warriors had slaughtered the Roanoke survivors, because they were living with a rival tribe. He even produced European-made iron tools as proof. This supports the mainland theory that the colony moved 50 miles inland toward the Albemarle Sound, seeking better soil and protection. Let's stay with what's certain. Archaeological finds at Site X have revealed 16th-century English pottery and tools far from the coast. This suggests at least a small group was there. But does a few pieces of pottery prove a massacre? Historians are divided. On one hand, Powhatan had a political motive to appear powerful and dangerous to the new Jamestown settlers. On the other, the lack of any large-scale European settlement found inland suggests they didn't thrive. Perhaps the truth is a mixture of both. A move inland, a struggle for resources, and an eventual collapse under the weight of local geopolitics. But who was actually telling the truth? The chief or the artifacts? In 1937, a tourist walked into Emory University with a 21-pound stone covered in Elizabethan-style script. It was signed by Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter. The inscription told a heartbreaking story of the death of her husband and child at the hands of savages. For a brief moment, it seemed the mystery was solved. But, as with all things in history, the deeper you dig, the more the foundation shifts. Over the next few years, 47 more stones were discovered by the same man, creating a trail of breadcrumbs leading all the way to Georgia. And this is where it gets interesting. Most historians now agree that the later stones were a massive hoax designed to capitalize on the public's fascination. However, the first stone, the one found in Chowan County, remains an anomaly. Its linguistic patterns and the weathering of the stone are surprisingly consistent with the period. Let's weigh the possibilities. Is it a lone, authentic message from a dying woman, later exploited by fraudsters? Or was the entire sequence a sophisticated forgery from the very start? If the first stone is real, it paints a picture of a colony that didn't just integrate or move, but suffered a long, agonizing decline into the interior of the continent. Perhaps the most shocking evidence didn't come from the ground, but from a map that had been sitting in the British Museum for centuries. In 2012, researchers examined John White's Virginia Pars map using modern imaging. They noticed two small patches of paper where the map had been corrected. When they looked through the paper, they found a hidden symbol, a four-pointed star, the standard 16th century mark for a fort. This symbol was located about 50 miles west of Roanoke. What's usually overlooked here is the implication that White knew exactly where the colony intended to build their permanent home. This wasn't a secret from him, it was a secret from the Spanish. At the time, maps were high-level state secrets. If the Spanish captured White's map, they would have a direct road to the English settlement. This leads us to a new perspective. The disappearance might have been a deliberate disinformation campaign. The settlers moved to Site X as planned, but the rescue never came, and the location was eventually forgotten as the map gathered dust. However, excavations at Site X haven't found a fort, only domestic artifacts. So, was the map a plan that was followed, or just a dream that never materialized? When we peel back the layers of the Roanoke mystery, we find something more tragic than a supernatural event. We find a story of colonial abandonment. Let's stay with what's certain. Sir Walter Raleigh, the man who funded the venture, was losing money and political favor. By the time the war with Spain ended, Roanoke was no longer a strategic asset. It was a failed investment. It is highly likely that the official failure to find the colony was as much about politics as it was about the wilderness. Searching for 115 people in a vast forest was expensive, and in the eyes of the Crown, they were likely already dead or irredeemable. We are left with two competing truths. One is the legend of a colony that vanished into the mist. The other is the documented reality of a group of people who did exactly what they said they would do. They moved, they survived as long as they could, and they eventually disappeared into the families and the soil of the American coast. The settlers weren't lost, they were simply left behind. The real mystery isn't where they went. The mystery is why we still pretend we don't know. History is rarely as clean as a ghost story. but the truth found in the records is often far more human. If you found these layers of the Roanoke mystery compelling, consider joining us for more investigations into the archives. What do you think happened at Site X? Let us know in the comments. I am the Archivist, and this has been Hidden Layer. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, keep weighing the evidence.